The Dragon Kingdom. Meili's Witchbeast observation record V1, stay here, okay? Ordered Felt. Can't tend to you even if you follow us in. The one who received the order, the divine dragon Volcanica, let out a deep voice. I am Volcanica. In accordance with the ancient covenant, the will of thee who hath reached the top shall be questioned. Felt scowled, unsatisfied with his response. Her distrust in the dragon was apparent through her expression. As one of the esteemed participants of the royal selection to decide the next ruler of the Dragon Kingdom of Lugunica, her attitude was rather insolent, considering it was the dragon, a being that deserved her utmost respect. However, her rudeness paled in comparison with the behavior of her other companions. Master Divine Dragon, sir, please have some of our dried meat, said Flam, offering dried meat to the dragon from her bag. Let's domesticate a dragon, added Grassus. Stop it, you too, exclaimed Ezo from the side. This is the divine dragon we are facing, a living, breathing dragon that's famous the world over. I have nothing but great admiration for him on both an intellectual and emotional level. Despite his tremendous power, Volcanica seemed to have treated Felt with respect. Felt, on the other hand, was worried about angering the dragon and becoming a target of the devastating power he had displayed earlier, which was why she was taken aback by the nonchalance shown by the other three. Or maybe, said Meili, as she rested her elbow on her lap and placed her chin on her hand, they're not worried because you're with us, Mr. Redhair. I suppose that's not entirely inaccurate, responded Reinhard. I've known Flam and Grassus ever since they were babies. I've looked after them as if they were my own sisters. So you're like a real brother to them, huh? Meili asked, squinting her eyes before gesturing at the twins. What about you guys? Do you feel the same? The young master is the young master, answered Flam. The young master who needs to be taken care of, said Grassus. You heard Themum, Meili said to Reinhard suggestively. He let out a bitter smile, without saying a word. Reinhard was quite inept at hiding his feelings. Even during their short journey, he had allowed a stranger like Meili to see through him time and time again. I was nervous at first knowing the Sword Saint was tagging along, but I'm not scared anymore. Before I knew it, all my anxiety was gone. Kinda like when I was with the white-haired lady. Maybe all strong, important people are alike-y. In Meili's mind, Emilia and Reinhard were similar in terms of their strength and airheadedness. Elsa was also like that. Emilia and Reinhard's demeanor reminded Meili of her late sister figure. My chest used to start aching whenever I thought about her, but that hasn't happened lately, she thought. Emilia once told me that that's not a bad thing, but I don't know. It was difficult for Meili to contemplate her own feelings. She'd always done whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, like an animal. That was the only sort of lifestyle she knew. Now she was burdened with responsibilities even if she didn't want them. But weirdly enough, I don't hate this. Maybe I'm growing as a person too. Gosh, he's finally calmed down, said Felt as she returned to the group after convincing Volcanica to remain outside the entrance to the watchtower, where he could be seen with his wings folded. Despite sitting there quietly, he still exuded an overwhelmingly intimidating presence. Ezo let out a small as he stood next to Meili and observed the dragon. But to think that the divine dragon would listen to your orders, if you add the Sword Saint Reinhard into the mix, you might just be able to acquire the kingdom with might alone, Miss Felt. What a savage suggestion, Felt replied. If power is all you need to rule a kingdom, then Reinhard could have done that yesterday and made himself the sole conqueror. There'd be no need for me. Right. I would never do such a thing, responded Reinhard. The Astria family was given the title of the Sword Saint and kept away from the seat of power precisely because they feared we might act on such a barbaric idea. Don't bombshell us with your heavy family history, Felt exclaimed as she smacked Reinhard on the back while he smiled bitterly. She shrugged her shoulders at his expression. As Ezo had stated, however, with the devastating power of the Sword Saint and the Divine Dragon, which had nearly obliterated the desert in their earlier bout, under her belt, Felt was practically invincible. Buat, interjected Meili. That dragon is also on good terms with the lady in my camp. There's no guarantee that he'll listen to Felt alone. Did you hear that? Felt said. Maybe he kisses every candidate's ass. There goes your plan, Ezo. As your strategist, I wasn't seriously suggesting the idea. Although it's natural to aim for victory in a competition, it must be attained through fair play. Relying on an outrageous power, and one that we just so happen to stumble upon by chance, if I may add, is not an action deemed worthy of a true victor. I wasn't being serious either. Geez, learn to loosen up a bit. Master Ezo is a very stern individual, commented Flam. He should learn from people like Lady Felt and us, added Grassus. Their comments were rather disrespectful considering it was directed at their mistress, but Felt simply brushed it off with a laugh and said, "That's for sure." With Felt standing in the center, the group turned around to get a view of the desert. Your wish finally came true, Reinhard, Felt remarked. Last time you were here, you couldn't get past the Whittle's sandbox and went crying home, right? Yes, I'm thrilled to have finally reached here. It's all because of you and Meili, he replied with a smile, completely unfazed by Felt's crude comment. Amused, Felt snickered and started walking. Everyone followed. As Meili walked at the very back of the group, the little crimson scorpion came out of her hair and sat atop her head. Feeling its weight, she entered the tower and looked up at the long spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever. Seems like we're back here again, she muttered without anyone else hearing. The Pleiades watchtower was also known as the Great Library of Pleiades. Meili had to prove she could help anyone traverse the Auguria sand dunes with her ability in order to obtain her right to stay in the kingdom of Lugunica. Her ability was technically already proven the moment the group arrived at the tower. However, some may argue her mission was only complete after they got back safe and sound. Imagine if they said we were only able to cross the desert because Reinhard was with us, mused Felt. Lady Felt, said Flam, exasperated by the idea. That's not funny, commented Grassus. There was a good possibility their accomplishment was going to be invalidated by having such an extraordinary companion. But if it weren't for Reinhard, they could have very well perished from Volcanica's greeting. However, it was also possible that Volcanica wouldn't have gotten so worked up in the first place if Reinhard wasn't there. So, it was difficult to give a final verdict on whether his accompanying them was good or bad. I don't hate Mr. Redhair Thuo, said Meili. I mean, he is kinda cool. I'll take that as a compliment, responded Reinhard. It's true that you kept all the other witchbeasts at bay, while all I did was rouse the divine dragon. I'm really ashamed. It's not uncommon for a backup plan to backfire, commented Ezo, sympathetically. I've had such experiences before. It was rare for Meili to pay someone lip service, so she was confused by her own actions, but she quickly concluded that it must have been because she'd let her guard down when she realized she had succeeded in her role. In other words, she was in a good mood. She was glad that she was finally able to do something for Subaru and the others. So this is the Library of the Dead, Ezo exclaimed, throwing his arms wide open with widened eyes. The place that caused the greatest conflict in the Pleiades watchtower. As a dwarf, Ezo was small in stature, but usually carried himself in a dignified manner, which made him appear more mature than one might expect from a person of his height. However, at this moment, his eyes were glimmering with curiosity like a child that just been given a new toy. He looked like a totally different person. Master Ezo, you look as happy as a clam. It's very heartwarming, said Flam. Master Ezo, you're smiling like a conniving person who came up with a great scheme, added Grassus. No one is scheming anything, Miss Grassus, Ez retorted excitedly. Although it's not like I'm trying to warm anyone's heart. Either, Miss Flam. All I'm trying to say is that this is a historic moment. Ezo started running into the library. He couldn't keep his attention on any one thing, instead trying to consume everything around him. Seeing him run around, Felt let out a sigh. She looked around the room filled with books. Books, books, and more books makes me sick. Are you being humble? Reinhard asked. You've been reading a lot of books lately, my lady. That's only because I thought it's better to be well-read, said Felt. I still don't like books and still get sick being surrounded by books I don't care about. You don't care, huh? Reinhard said, furrowing his brows. Noticing his reaction, Felt asked, What? As she looked up at him. What's with that solemn look? Is it weird that I'm not interested in dead people? Not to sound crass, but I don't remember actin' all whiny to have you believe I'm that sorta person." "No, you're absolutely correct," responded Reinhard. "I can't imagine you obsessing over someone who has died, Lady Felt. I was just impressed how you could have such a strong conviction." "Impressed, huh?" Felt closed one eye and made a skewed frown. After a pause, she said, "Ah," realizing something. "Reinhard, there's a book of the dead you want to read, right?" Reinhard said nothing. It was extremely rare for him to not respond to Felt, whether in word or action. His silence alone was proof. He had a lot on his mind about the matter. "I could never fool you, my lady," he finally said. "The only way you could get one over me is through a physical fight. There's no one in the world who can beat you at that." "That's not what I meant." His eyes began to wander, as if he was trying to process his overwhelming emotions. He then looked around the library. "If this library really contains books recording the memories of all the people that died, then you'll be able to know the feelings of the person you want to know better," said Felt, crossing her arms. "Let me guess, you want to read your grandma's book, right?" Reinhard gasped. "How did you know?" he said, blinking rapidly. "You know that I've been corresponding with Granny Carol, right?" Felt replied, letting out a laugh. "And it's not like I wasn't paying attention in Pristella. Everyone knows you and your granddad ain't on good terms. They just don't say anything." Reinhard said nothing. "Would finding your grandma's book make you happy?" Felt sounded like her usual self, but there was a tinge of kindness in her voice when she asked her last question. It was a question meant to console Reinhard, and he also noticed it. However, he slowly shook his head. "It wouldn't," he answered. "I'm interested in her book, of course, but it wouldn't have much of an impact on me. It's just what? I want my father to read her book." Felt paused as she processed the reason Reinhard wanted his grandmother's book. It was to help someone else. As simple as that. She let out a big sigh, exasperated by his attitude. "And here I thought you were getting better. It looks like you might be getting worse. I apologize if I'm being unprofessional by bringing personal matters up during a mission. I'm not angry about that. Did you think my reason for participating in the royal selection is unrelated to my personal reasons?" She answered before gesturing at the library with her chin. "Come on, let's start looking." Reinhard said nothing, looking confused by her gesture. "Didn't you hear me? We're gonna look for your grandma's book. Although knowing you, you might not need any help." "Lady Felt," Reinhard called out her name ecstatically. "Stop lookin' so happy. I just don't want you standing next to me lookin' all depressed. Speaking of which," she said, turning her face away from Reinhard. Ezo was running around the library, followed by Flam and Grassus. They looked as lively as ever. By contrast, Meili was standing quietly by herself. Although Felt wasn't expecting a thorough tour of the library from Meili, who said she didn't know the library too well, her quietness was rather conspicuous. "Why are you being so quiet?" Felt asked. "Don't tell me you're just annoyed by Ezo's enthusiasm." "Felt," responded Meili, looking up at Felt and Reinhard as they approached. Noticing her eyes shimmering with anxiety, Felt quickly asked her, "What's wrong?" Meili hesitated for a moment before she spoke. "I got an eerie feeling from the library. Those books on the floor were already there when we came in, right? Buat. But what?" "Emilia tidied the place up before we departed the last time we were here. She said, it's not good manners to leave a place a mess." Reinhard, Ezo, Felt quickly called their names as soon as Meili finished talking. Reinhard, who was already by her side, responded, "Yes, ma'am," and stood next to them. Ezo, Flam, and Grassus also came rushing back. Ezo looked confused, expecting an explanation. Felt pointed at the books on the floor. "According to Meili, there shouldn't be any books out." "So are you suggesting someone came here before we did?" Ezo asked. "That's one possibility. Another possibility is," Reinhard replied, as he picked up one of the books and opened it. "Ah," exclaimed Meili, noticing something. Felt also noticed what that was. "Meili, you said there were books of the dead that you can and can't read, right? Are all the ones you can't read blank like this one?" asked Reinhard. The book in his hand was filled with blank pages. Meili shook her head as she looked at the book he was holding. "No, nothing of that sort. The books that can't be read also had their own unique letters written in Theum." "Miss Meili is right," said Ezo. All the books I pulled from the shelves had something written in them. Although many of them were too difficult to understand, the only books with blank pages are the ones on the floor. You say only, but, Felt said, scratching her head and looking at the pile of books on the floor. It looked as if someone had knocked down a whole bookshelf. There must have been a few hundred books scattered about. If someone went on a rampage here, it must have been someone who's skilled enough to sneak past the divine dragon, suggested Flam. A big weirdo like the young master, added Grassus. But that's more likely than an entire bookshelf falling over on its own, concluded Ezzo. Miss Felt, if there is an intruder, we must consider searching for them or withdrawing. Taking her vassal's advice into consideration, Felt turned her attention to the spine of the book Reinhard was holding, then to the pile on the floor. No matter who the intruder is, the hint lies in the books. However, there wasn't much she could glean from them. From the names, all I can say is that they're probably related to Valatia. Not to mention that this is all happening at the same time Emilia is infiltrating there. I'm getting a bad feeling about this, she muttered to herself, starting to suspect that the Empire had some sort of connection to the anomalous Books of the Dead. End.